Hey, we're live. Welcome to the Rad and Norty Show. Tonight, we are discussing exercise in your brain. The weather's getting nicer. I'm sure you've all been spending a lot more time outside like myself. We're going to talk about that. And when we're spending more time outside, we feel better. We're in a better space mentally. And I don't think it's hard to convince anybody of that truth. But, why? We do ask ourselves, why do we exist? Why does exercise make us feel better? These are the quintessential questions of the Rad and Norty Show that we're always attempting to answer, but rarely arriving at anything productive, but taking you along for a fun and enjoyable ride. So don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back talking about exercise in your brain tonight. And we're live. All right. After taking a 1 week break last week to rest, rejuvenate, recharge after a long stretch of streaming week in and week out, we are back for another Rad and Norty Show. How you doing, Josh? What's going on in your life? Catch me up. It's been a while.
Yeah, it feels like it's been a lifetime with the week off. It felt good to rest and recharge. Not much is new. I thought I broke my foot this weekend, but I think it's just maybe a high ankle sprain. I go take a boxing class and I stepped on a bag and rolled my ankle.
Stepped on a bag?
Yeah, I was doing like toe touches on a bag. It was like an MMA boxing class.
Okay.
So they have like these body bags that you lay down so you can ground and pound, beat it up.
Okay.
And doing toe touches on the bag, and I missed, and I put all my body weight on my right ankle, and my foot just folded.
So is this a boxing class or is it an MMA class?
It switches. So I go every Sunday morning, and it was primarily boxing. They switched that class to kickboxing. Now it's an MMA one. It's always fun. It gets the blood flowing. It gets, gets me exercising.
You and I might have to break out the gloves next time we see each other. I feel that maybe we'll do it as a Rad and Norty fundraiser.
You'll probably take me if it comes to wrestling or anything like that. Like, I have no experience wrestling, but if it's a straight up boxing match, like I could probably hold my own.
All right. I don't know if you know, but I used to box on a team for a brief period of time. I could throw some jabs and sneak in some dirty hooks, my friend.
All right. I feel good about it.
All right. Well, wager your bets. Let us know in the chat, who do you think wins a legit boxing match? Rad or Norty? Or maybe we should go tag team style and just find two other chumps out there to box us.
That'd be fun. Who else we got in Brain and Spine Group wants to enter the boxing tournament?
That's true. We could find two other people in the organization to come and throw down.
For fundraiser, for fundraiser.
Purely fundraising. Yeah. Purely fundraising. The only thing going on, I mean, I've been spending a lot of time outside personally. It's been good.
I was going to ask how the lawn's doing.
It's, it's coming along. There's been a lot of, I got a little video for everyone here.
All right.
My latest toy from the lawn. But in general, let's see here. Pull it up here. This is my latest toy. I have invested in a lawn mowing robot. And so it finally got installed after months of waiting. It's pretty exciting to watch this thing tool around.
This freaks me out.
So there's like a little barrier wire set up. And, let's see if we can flip the video. Maybe not. It's on its side now. I don't know what happened here.
Oh, geez.
How do we video settings? Okay, video. Okay, that was the wrong way.
Yep. We're getting there. We're getting
inching
closer. Hey, there we go.
The dogs are not sure how they feel about it. But it just sort of tools around, bumps into things, backs up, turns, goes another direction. And it just never stops. So eventually it's supposed to just kind of cover everything.
How long does it take to cover the entire yard?
That's a great question. I guess we're going to find out, because the big question now is, as you can see in the video, there's we have a fence, and the fence gate has to be open to like let the robot out. So the question is like, well, how long do we let leave the gates open? And there's a lot of fine tuning. It's not a simple plug and play, but we're working on it. And
what happens if your robot escapes? It just wreaks havoc on the neighborhood.
Well, the robot can't leave the
allegedly
boundary wire, but that's true. So, I mean, if you want to get into it, I mean, theoretically, yes, I'm sure like Russia could hack my robot.
They're hacking into that thing. That thing's taking over your entire block.
But here's the real question that I think you and the chat can help us with. What do we name this thing? Because technically I got to give it a name in the app that I use to control it, which is actually kind of fancy. I can even see what it's up to right now. All right, I can see what my mower is doing at all times. Right now, loading. Oh, it's charging. Not very exciting. But it looks like it's scheduled to go back out in about 40 minutes.
Here, I know how to solve this. We're going to do this properly.
What's that?
I know how to do this. We're going to do this properly. We're going to have ChatGPT name your robot. So we're going to have AI name your AI robot.
We've come up with some ideas, but Julia and I have not agreed on a name yet. Although I have a feeling we're each going to end up calling it our own thing.
All right, let's check this out.
But before I tell everyone what we've named our robot, I'll hear the suggestions from the chat. But yeah, I'm trading in my weekly exercise of push mowing a rather large lawn, which, as you saw in the video, my yard is not small. It's not the largest out there by any stretch of the imagination, but it's on the large side for push mowing a lawn. Julia's convinced we should name it Mowy.
This says Mobot, Lawn Rover, Grass Guru, Turbo Trim.
Turbo Trim.
I like the idea of Turbo Trim. That might be my favorite.
I wanted to just name it Mo, like M-O. I thought that was like a perfect name. Julia wants to call it Moey. ChatGPT wants to call it
Turbo
Trim.
Or Grass Guru's fun.
Grass Guru.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll leave this one open to the chat for a while. And
the big Mobowski,
The big Mobowski.
Mm-hmm.
The Great Bambino. So yeah, that's been fun. I mean, so we're curious to kind of see how this thing works out. So I'm trading in my exercise of mowing the lawn now for a plethora of other projects. But that's how I've been getting my exercise. You mentioned you go to the gym on Saturday mornings. You're up pretty early every morning, right? I mean, you're an early riser like me.
Yeah, I usually get up around 4 or 5, and I'll do a little workout. I have some bands.
Are you working out every morning when you get up?
Yes, I used to love like going to the gym and lifting weights. Got hectic over COVID, and the gyms here are kind of small. So I switched to just using a couple bands and doing a lot of body weights. I do like walking lunges, push-ups.
At home? Are you a home workout person? Yeah. So you get up every morning early.
First thing I do
at home.
Yep. Drink a cup of water, start working out.
You don't drink coffee first thing in the morning?
I wait till after my workout. So,
No, I couldn't do it. Maybe if I was even if I was running, I feel like I would still drink a cup of coffee first thing in the morning.
And I always said, like, I was always the type of person who was like, how does somebody work out so early in the morning? Like, how does someone do that? And then once I built it into my routine and, did it every morning, like if I don't start my morning that way, I am in a much worse mood. Like, I just enjoy getting the body moving, waking up and getting a workout in every day.
Got it. So you are definitely a morning exerciser. I definitely would be. I am the same. Well, although right now, over the period of my life, I feel like my exercise routine has fluctuated from very rigid, early morning, get up, run. I've been through phases where I'll go like Goggins style and just run for miles and miles and miles.
That's what I used to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I've gone through phases where it'll like get up at 4 a.m. and go to the gym. Probably my most consistent phase of my entire life was during undergrad, when I would pretty much like lift and run 3 miles like pretty religiously every single day. Like, did not miss a beat. Then I decided I want to go to medical school, and that's just went downhill.
Yeah.
So that was, that's kind of been my trajectory. Now I'm much more of a get out in the yard and dig holes, lift trees. I'm doing that farm boy.
Yeah, practical workouts.
Yeah, lifting trees, man. No, that'll make you strong.
That's another thing, because I feel like when people hear exercise, they immediately think, go run or go do something where you like have to be doing some type of like cardio, basically. Well, I guess everything is cardio, but
I think for the cardiovascular benefits of exercise, I definitely think that the like 30 minutes a day of cardio is probably more beneficial. Zero chemical, trying to get yoked for their sub eyes so they don't get bullied. Nobody's gonna bully you on sub eyes. Just go and have fun. Get yoked in the brain, my friend. That's what people are gonna want to know. They're gonna ask you all kinds of stupid questions because they're gonna want to know how much you know, how much you don't know. There's no way to avoid it. It just is what it is. But yeah, I mean, by all means, get physically yoked. You have my support. But getting mentally yoked, that's what people are going to test you on, sub eyes. John, welcome to the show. John and I shared a very special time exercising together in the middle of a desert deployment. So those are some.
Yeah, let's start with, because what I was going to say is I feel like my workout trajectory has definitely shifted, and I definitely have my preferences and the things that I enjoy more than others. But at the end of the day, they're all some type of physical exertion.
Sure.
But on that note, I think let's hear about some of the military-esque workouts. What was that like?
Ooh,
what effect did that have on the brain?
I think I was very like that period of my life. I would say I was very consistent in terms of exercise overall, but I definitely went through like different phases throughout my military career of, did I focus on more cardiovascular or weightlifting? Go on. You look like you got a burning question.
I have a couple of questions, because and I think this is important, and well, I think it's important. I don't know how important it actually is to touch on this, but when you first go to basic training, I'm sure your workouts are very
structured. Couldn't tell you. I've never been to basic training in my life.
Okay,
basic training is for the Army.
Okay, well,
I went to boot camp or recruit training, but I did not go to basic training.
Same thing, right? You go to some type of
definitively not the same thing.
Same thing.
I'm following. I'm tracking.
I don't mean that as anything disrespectful. The Army,
it was
Navy,
disrespectful. Take your words back.
My bad. I take it all back. So when you went to boot camp, that was I assume that was more structured, right? Like you are being put through workouts that you have to do.
That's what people think. Honestly, the reality of boot camp was actually Nolan's telling me to give you a break.
See, my bad. I didn't go to boot camp or basic training.
Yeah, it shows. Oh, burn. Honestly, I mean, I think the people in their minds really build up boot camp or whatever basic entry level training your military service branch has as being this place like really intense physical experience. And I'll be honest, like I can't speak for the Army or the Air Force or whatever. In the Marine Corps, honestly, not really. And I mean, there's plenty of physical things that you do, but it's generally much more practical. All right, you do a lot of sparring or various you do these things called pugil sticks. It's literally like American Gladiator.
That's the thing where you hit people with
you
like
literally just
rock
beat
'em
the
boppers.
crap out of each other, right?
Let's do that.
Because the reality, it's not intended really to be exercise, or I mean, there's some degree of like skill learning, but bottom line is what they're trying to do at boot camp is basically wipe the hard drive of whatever
it's a clean
background
reset
you were raised with, create a clean slate, and then instill a warrior's mentality, period. Right? That's why you do these things like pugil sticks. It's not like you're not going to go out there and just beat the Taliban down with a pugil stick. It's, we're going to take this person, maybe, because you got people from all different walks of life. Maybe you've got the kid that, picked on kids in school and literally never met any, big fish in a small pond, never met anybody that, squared up to him and just knocked his teeth out. Right. So they want to take that kid and they want to stick him against somebody bigger and humble him. Right. Or maybe you got the dweeb who's literally never been in a fight in his life and doesn't even know what it feels like to get hit. Right. That's why you do this kind of stuff. Right. So that they create a level playing field of instilling a warrior's mindset. It's not really teaching you tactics. You've got a million different specialty schools that you go to and training programs you go through after boot camp that really teach you
whatever physical skills.
Yeah.
I got it.
Let's see what John has to say. If you're not used to pushing your body to its physical limits, then the experience is subjective. Well, I gotta read that slow. Yeah. If you are not used to pushing your body to its physical limits, then it's extreme. Well, that is true. So the experience is subjective. That is true. I mean, I was like a multi-season athlete. I was in some of the best shape of my life when I left for boot camp. And then it was like I felt like my physical training declined while I was at boot camp because you have very limited time to continue in your physical training. Now, granted, I did go in at a time where recruitment numbers were up. Like we were recruiting heavily at the time that I went in. This was before the drawdowns in the, post 2010 and beyond, right? Mm-hmm. So there were waivers for everything. I mean, we had fat bodies all over boot camp. These were kids that could not exercise at all. So, yeah, they struggle. But, I mean, that's an extreme example, in my opinion. I think, by and large, you take the median of what's showing up at boot camp, and it's generally not considered a physical experience for them.
I gotcha. And I guess, that still is more structured, right? Like you're doing those type of things as some type of exercise. At the very least.
I mean, sure, yeah.
What does it shift to after that? So after you get out of boot camp, like what's your exercise look like? Is it you get to do your own thing? Are there still like structured activities? Like I'm just curious as to what.
It's extremely variable.
Okay.
But I can give you some examples.
Yeah.
And this is obviously strictly from the Marine Corps perspective, but you go to like MCT, Marine Combat Training. That's a 4-week training course. You're going to do virtually zero physical training, PT, like training focused on improving your physique. Now because you're doing 4 weeks of nothing but just pure combat training. Now, granted, that's a physical activity, right? You're humping weapon systems on your shoulder. You're running, doing shooting drills. I mean, you're not just sitting around playing video games, learning combat strategies, or sitting in a classroom learning combat strategies. But you're not drastically trying to improve your conditioning or your strength. And I think probably people that are more strength focused in their training, they probably suffered the most in these types, right? Because they're like losing muscle mass. You're running on minimal calories.
You're more flexibility than it is. Yeah. flexibility and cardiovascular is different than just pure muscle mass.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a difference between people that are lifting weights versus, CrossFit athletes, right? CrossFit athletes have their own type of physique and, physical abilities. And it's like, no, I mean, if you need them to lift raw weight compared to a power lifter, they're not going to be able to lift anything. But you ask a power lifter to like walk more than 6 feet and they're going to like probably have a heart attack.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's probably like the extreme example of like little training. Then you kind of get out to the fleet where people have varied experiences, but for the most part, you have like organized, like platoon level PT physical training a couple times a week. Everybody comes in, maybe like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You work out together for 2 hours and then everybody goes, hits a shower, gets changed, and then heads off to the regular work day or whatever. It's like it's like having a 9 to 5-ish job where everybody comes in early a couple days a week to work out together before you head in to the office is kind of how I would put it.
I got you. Well, I mean, that makes sense. And the main reason I'm asking, and this is a good segue, and you touched on a few other things I'd like to steer into once we get through it, is going through the different types of workouts, exercises. We've talked about a few different things like multi-sport, multi-season. I forgot what you said. You've played sports. You were on the wrestling
multi-season sports.
Multi-season sports. So you wrestled. You went to boot camp. You mentioned running. Like all of these are very different activities, and I'd love to, if you can recall, how you felt when you were doing each one of them. Like, and when the effect that the different types of exercise were having on your body.
Well, I've always been probably of all the different ways to exercise, running. I've been a big runner most of my life, with the exception of recently. I don't really run much anymore. My knees hurt too much. I'm getting too old.
Been there. Yeah.
I mean, I went through a period, I think last summer, where I got back to running. And I was probably putting in 5-6-ish miles, and it was like my knees were just trash.
They just don't hold up. Yeah.
I just like, I'm the type of person, like and my wife can attest to this. Like I don't have a moderate speed to like really much of anything. Like I just have
you just go.
It's on or it's off. Like that. It's just that's just how I am, and really in all facets of life, right? It's very hard for me to like be like, oh, I'm just gonna kind of do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Like I'm not an a la carte type of person in how I live my life, right? And so when this period last summer where I started running again, I mean, I probably hadn't really run in 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, I really was off the bandwagon. But like day one, I was already running 3 miles. Like I can just that's just how I've been.
Yeah.
Like, I can just like I'm convinced, at least at this phase of my life, I can run 3 miles anytime I need to.
I could probably do a mile. Like slow,
right?
But I could probably do one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna feel great after 3 miles, but like I'm not gonna hit the point where like I can't finish 3 miles. Right. But am I cruising 3 miles at like 17.5 minutes like I used to? No.
Kid I went to high school with ran a 4-minute mile. So
that's impressive. Yeah. I mean, maybe at my peak, I probably a single mile I may have been able to come. I think I may have come in like sub 5 minutes, but not like 4.
His was like low 4s. He ran. His name's Evan Jager. He ended up running the steeplechase in the Olympics. Kid was a freak.
Nice. Yeah. No, that's impressive.
Yeah. So like that's what I think when I hear mile times. Like that's always what I think of, and like I don't know how he did it.
Yeah.
It's still.
I mean, in general, right? I mean, if you're sub 6 minutes, you're doing pretty good.
But like that's like you like running, and even some of the articles we pulled up. Like, did you ever get a runner's high? Or did it just make you feel good? Like, what's the benefit?
Definitely a thing. I mean, that's a thing. Yeah, for sure. It's 100% a thing.
Because I was a chubbier kid in middle school, I started running and I loved it. I would just run. There's a bike trail by my mom's house, and I used to just run and just take off. And you do get that euphoric where you just like you hit cruise control and you're just going.
Yeah. Well, that's the nice spot to be in,
Yeah.
right? When your body kind of just like stops.
And then I'm like, I don't know where I am, and I
just,
should probably turn around. Yeah.
You have that point, right? It's like sort of like the entry point, where it's like it's kind of painful, you're tired, but then it's like your lungs kind of catch up, your body is just kind of like used to running on like lower oxygen demand, and at that point you're cruising.
You're just going. Yeah.
How much and how fast can you maintain that pace at? And that's really, I mean, that's the key to like getting your good run times in.
And it always made me feel good. Like that was my start of like working out outside of just playing sports or playing outside. Like that's when it started. And then it just evolved over the years. And
I mean,
just doing physical activity feels good. Yeah. I'd say all of them make me feel good. Which ones make me feel better is probably a mix of some type of flexibility with some cardio mixed in, which is why I like boxing. It's cardio. You get some flexibility with the range of motion and like technique. And I personally love just lifting weights, not super heavy, but I like the burn of a good weight lift.
I've been through those phases. I'd say significantly less than run. I mean, running phases I've been in and out of my whole life. Lifting, I did a handful where the guy came back from Afghanistan probably the biggest I've ever been, because there's nothing to do other than work and lift weights. Like nobody wants to run in Afghanistan. Sorry. I don't care.
I don't want to run.
Remember there was this one freak lieutenant we'd see out there just like doing like wind sprints and stuff. And we're like, dude, what are you running from?
Everything.
Yeah. Whereas like everyone else, like all you do is just like lift, eat. I mean, the big issue, right, when you're lifting in the middle of Afghanistan is like, how do you get enough calories, right?
Yeah, because that's like I've had a hard time putting on weight when I was trying to like bulk up and get strong, right? Like it's so hard to eat that much.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have that much of an issue. I'm just a short little guy, but you know, these big Hulk-like individuals like Nolan that are like 6.5 feet tall. I mean, they can't even shovel enough calories down from the chow hall to fuel their muscle growth.
Well, and
we would do favors for the chow hall and like ask them for like food in return.
Just trading favors for food.
Yeah. Well, like the chow hall would get like, I don't know, a pallet of water bottles or whatever delivered, and they call up John and be like, hey, can you bring the forklift over and move it? He's like, well, I don't know. Can I get a blueberry cake in return? And that's like, you literally would barter like that. And that's, that's how the big boys would fuel themselves.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the reason I was asking about the different types of workouts and how they made you feel is you touched on it again, where you've got these power lifters or these freak athletes where like they may look a certain way, but it's not necessarily like the most healthy thing in the world. Like when you see,
those guys are, I think in general, I think those guys are pretty unhealthy, frankly. I don't know all the details, but
a lot of it
they're like, probably more healthy today, but 30, 40 years ago, when these guys really didn't understand nutrition, these guys, I think, were like insanely unhealthy.
Even the guys, like I still think any like Olympic style bodybuilder would probably tell you if they're going for a show, like you basically dehydrate your body to look like that. Yeah. And it's not healthy.
Yeah, I don't think that's not the worst. The things I think about are like the guys that aren't trying to do that. They're really like going for like raw powerlifting numbers.
And even that's probably isn't the most healthy thing on your body. It's a lot.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's terrible for your joints.
You're carrying around extra weight. Yeah.
Straight up terrible for your joints. But I mean, just the amount of fat that they have to consume. It's terrible for things like your arteries, right? I think there's a lot of cardiovascular disease among these guys that, really, I mean, like when you're eating like 3 rotisserie chickens in one meal because it's the only way you can like get enough fat and protein. to fuel your powerlifting. It's like, yeah, your muscles love it.
Mhm.
I promise you, your carotid arteries hate it.
Well, that's like, even when you look at like offensive linemen, right? I forget the famous one that after he retired looked like he lost another human being off of his body. And he was just
those are big dudes, man.
And they
Offensive
have to
linemen
be.
are big dudes, man.
And they have to be just to be in that space and be effective at it. And they leave and they're just like shredding a human being off of them.
Yeah.
So
I don't know how those guys are doing it. Like some of those guys that are older, man. I mean, how old is Jason Kelsey?
Well, he just renewed for another year, didn't he? He's
I
got to
don't know.
be.
I don't
He's
know
got to
his
be upper
contract
30s.
status. How old is he? Jason Kelsey.
I'm gonna guess 36. Final answer.
Wikipedia. 35. Right. So this guy's 2 years older than me. Like I could not imagine at 35. I mean, maybe it'd be a different story if you're like, have that type of conditioning throughout your whole life.
But you got to start to feel it more and more. I'd assume like everything hurts on me.
I don't see how a life of weightlifting doesn't. I mean, I feel like I have knee pain from a life of running.
Same for running basketball sports. Like I've torn an ACL. I had the other knee scoped.
Yeah,
like my knees are all kinds of beat up. But that begs the question of the topic is what type of effects does exercising have on your brain, your mental health?
So, yeah, I wanted to spend. I didn't get as much time as I wanted to like really research the science of what's known about this stuff. But bottom line is, right, I think cardiovascular exercise in general has very positive effects on the mental status of your brain, right? And also, I mean, probably the cardiovascular status, right? Microvascular disease is a very real thing. It's like, imagine like plaques in your coronary arteries, right? This is something, generally people generally understand that from the perspective of a heart attack. Well, that's your heart isn't the only place where that type of plaque builds up, right? It builds up in really blood vessels all over your body.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that the reason we know about it in the heart is because it causes a heart attack, and heart attacks are deadly things. And, and frankly, the American Heart Association has a great marketing department, right? I mean, that's just the sad state of healthcare. Different diseases will get different levels of public acknowledgement, frankly, just based on the publicity and the marketing department associated with that disease process, right?
Right.
Stroke is up there. I think stroke is a pretty good marketing department. The American Heart Association, coronary artery disease, pretty good marketing department. Breast cancer has a pretty good marketing department. They managed to rope the NFL in, right? But I think the primary example is like, well, look at ovarian cancer. Ovarian cancer kills far more women than breast cancer does. Breast cancer just has a better marketing department. So they have drastically more money to throw around for research and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of times, research and, medical advancements, frankly, they occur where people have the most money. And the most money has to do with who has the best marketing, right? So we don't necessarily throw money proportionally at the most important health concerns. That's sort of an aside for sure. But this whole idea of plaque building up in your blood vessels, right? It happens in the blood vessels of your brain. It happens in the blood vessels of your neck and the carotid arteries. And these are the types of things that cause brain problems, right? So, they can cause strokes. They can, cause generally... They can cause bleeds, but generally that's bleeding into your brain, but that's usually from high blood pressure, So that's more of a secondary effect of high blood pressure. The actual vessel disease usually causes more what we call ischemic problems in the brain, your traditional stroke, right? Cut off blood supply to a part of the brain, that part of the brain starts to die off, and that can happen from vascular disease. So cardiovascular exercise is helpful for staving off that kind of stuff, right? Diet and exercise really helps with that kind of stuff.
And that's exactly what I was gonna assume, right? Is when you're exercising, your blood's pumping better, you're getting more oxygen to the places that need it, right? Like your body can do what it's supposed to do without a struggle, or at least without too many problems, right? It's just got to help that. And like the thing that goes hand in hand with exercise is a diet, and keeping everything running smoothly has to have a positive impact, right? On your mental mood, your brain activity, like what do they always tell us when we were in schools? Like eat a healthy breakfast, keep your brain active. Like there had to have been some truth to that in some form or fashion, just because if you're doing those things to help maintain your body, your brain's got to be firing on all cylinders, or most of the cylinders at that point. I don't know if mine ever fires on all cylinders.
Well, that's true. We all have our off days and moments, but in general, I mean, I think like you're kind of pointing out, the cardiovascular side of things, I think it's very well established that is healthy from both a physical and a psychological perspective for your brain. I think there's a good article. I want to kind of browse through a little bit, kind of getting into the why of that and all that kind of stuff. But then the question, I mean, and that I think kind of contrasts a little bit more with like the pure physical weight training. I think that there's some benefit to that, but it's probably secondary to the cardiovascular effects of weight training.
Well, and that's another, this has nothing to do with like the brain side of things, but where I found the best mix was when I was doing weight training, but at a pace that required you to have good cardio, right? So I wasn't waiting a lot in between, and it's high reps,
I mean, I would assume that's probably kind of the whole.
Because I agree, if you're just big weights,
yeah. I mean, what you're describing is probably the whole kind of basis of CrossFit, right?
That's different. That's more like CrossFit's crazy, man. I would say that's probably not healthy on your body, just from a joint perspective.
Are you talking about like hardcore style CrossFit?
I mean, they're flinging their bodies around and rapidly and not thinking about form at all. And like, it just seems wildly dangerous, but I'm sure their cardiovascular health is fantastic.
Maybe.
So,
I don't
that's
know.
the way I look at it.
I suppose it depends on what your definition of CrossFit is. I mean, when I remember like CrossFit 10, 15 years ago, before it was a thing, right? It was more of like an idea, right? Their CrossFit gyms did not really exist at this time.
They weren't what they are, but they were still, it was more about the volume and the pace at which you do it. It wasn't necessarily about any type of like form. So it's still like the foundation was still there.
Once CrossFit became like a sport with like competitions and all these CrossFit gyms, that's when I think it kind of like took a more erratic.
I mean, it started off erratic, but those people are freak athletes, and what they do is incredible. But I just still don't think that's healthy on your body at all. But their cardiovascular health is probably pretty good.
But in general, I think the benefits come from the cardiovascular perspective.
Yeah.
Weight training, I don't know if there's a good argument for physical,
outside of just like accomplishing a task, and that's where I could see the weight training, because I agree with you.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a good argument for like health, like true health benefits of weight training.
It's like I said, the only
I mean, you could make a clear argument for bone health. That you could make an argument for, but
and mental health, if you're just like getting up and completing some type of like physical activity,
and that's better than
nothing.
Better than nothing for sure. But I think if you're comparing head to head, like what's going to be better for someone's health, go out and run a mile or lift as much weight as you can lift. I mean, the answer is, well, I'm not going to run because I'm 400 pounds and my knees hurt too much. And my name's David Goggins, pre-military service, or whatever your story is. I'm just making up BS. Sure, lift the weights. That's better than doing nothing. But to say like, well, I could do this or I could do that.
It's probably
you really want to do what's best for your health. I don't know that there would be a scientific or a medical justification for weight training over cardiovascular, with the exception of basically pre or post menopausal, like just like a menopausal woman, like perimenopausal, maybe that's how I would describe it. A perimenopausal woman with osteoporosis, right? Weight bearing exercise is very important for bone strength. And that's a product of, I believe it was called Wolf's Law. I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. Julia would be more knowledgeable of this. She's more of the bone health style doctor. I'm just sort of shooting from a random pool of knowledge in medical school because I am not an orthopedist by any stretch of the imagination. Although technically, I suppose these things do apply to like spine surgery and things like that, right? In general, right? Bone, the way that it functions, just put things very simply, the weight bearing of bone increases the growth of the bone, right? So if you want like bone weight bearing increases like growth and mineralization of the bone.
How does that work?
Ooh, now you're getting into like why does Wolf's Law exist? Yeah. So I basically gave you like the,
because I don't think I understand what you just said, but it sounds very interesting.
Let me backtrack and try to break this down. So when it comes to like bone health and bone growth, right? Mineralization of bone. When bone, bone turns over, right? It's a living entity, right? Bone is not, it's not a concrete cylinder in your body.
Mine are,
right? That just like is what it is, right? Bone is like there's blood that flows through bone.
Right.
It's very living. Now, granted, it is made up of a lot of very dense material in your body, right?
Yeah.
But it's a living entity, right? You drill into bone, it bleeds, right? It's not just like inert scaffolding for the body. Now, the more weight and pressure that bone undergoes, the more it has to respond to the weight and the pressure.
So it almost acts like its own muscle. Like people think of muscles, but the bone, I guess, is almost the same.
I mean, yeah, I would put it in the same category, right? Okay. It's the same sort of idea. If you don't use it, you lose it. Right? From a muscle perspective, right? Like resistance training can give you that sort of artificial exercising of the muscle, right? But if you are not weight bearing on those bones, right? Like let's say all you ever did was like isolated muscle workouts. The muscle, but otherwise you lived a completely sedentary lifestyle. You just sat in a chair, all right? You're basically working the muscle. The muscle is going to be healthy, but the bone underlying that muscle, if it never bears weight, right, it's not good for the bone, right?
Interesting.
So if you want to build bone growth, the best thing to do is be up, walking, moving, letting the weight of your body be suspended by your skeleton, right? That's how bones stay healthy, right? And so that's why the biggest recommendation to perimenopausal women who, for hormonal reasons, lose a lot of bone density, right? Without getting into the nitty gritty of that, basically the shift in their hormone levels changes the way that vitamin D and calcium are processed in the body, and their bone turnover can actually become very high, where they're basically breaking down their bone and they're not building it back up as well.
Gotcha.
Right. And so it's sort of like, their bones are like dissolving, basically. right? Hormones play a big part of regulating that process. So when women go through menopause, their scope of hormones changes drastically. This changes, and that's why you get a lot of growth spurts, right? Through what's the opposite of menopause? Well, it's puberty, right? Puberty, you have this big uptick in hormonal sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, all these things promote bone stability, bone health. That's why you go through growth spurts and you get stronger and, muscles get bigger and yada, yada, yada. Well, menopause is basically like the running out of these puberty hormones. And then what happens? Well, now your bones kind of start breaking down. So to combat that, leveraging Wolff's Law, which is this idea of, weight bearing to bone improves bone health. Weight bearing exercise is very important for bone health among that specific population. That was a very long explanation I did not intend to get into, but I thought it was good.
Yeah, well, that's
one of those, it's very common knowledge among doctors, but
I don't think that is
thinking about it. I thought maybe this is not very common knowledge for the average.
I feel like it's not, at least, or maybe I just had never thought about that or had learned that, because that's something I just never even thought about. But it makes a lot of sense, and it's one of the things, like when you're exercising, how you're exercising, the impact that it has on your body that I would have never thought about, and it makes sense for why our body works the way it does and why we need things like exercise, right? Like even simple walking around and bearing, like you mentioned, bearing your body weight, like that has an impact on your bones, right?
Yeah, completely, 100%. So another interesting tidbit that I think, I don't know how true it is. It must be true. I mean, why would somebody make this up? But supposedly there's an anatomy professor, not mine, I think it was one of my wife's anatomy professors, told them this story about how they did this dissection on a morbidly obese cadaver. And it was very difficult dissection, lots of fat and things like that, which does not make a dissection enjoyable. But they said once you got all of that, like fat and everything dissected out, and you got down to the muscle planes, they said it was like some of the most spectacular muscular anatomy they've ever seen, because you have this individual who's basically been carrying around all this extra weight for their entire life. And
that's fascinating.
Their muscles were very healthy, and they were just bogged down by fat, musculoskeletal fat. And the thing is too that when we're talking about fat and being weight from a health perspective, what we call visceral fat is much more has much more negative consequences than musculoskeletal fat. And visceral fat is like the fat on your organs.
Yeah.
Right? Viscera meaning like your organs, your bowel, your liver, your kidneys, your spleen, your heart. I mean, how much fat is kind of like building up on these organs? That's not a good thing from a health perspective.
And is that strictly just from being overweight? Like, how does something like that happen?
That's more
heard, like when you think of like fat on organs, you think of like the heart having like blockage. Like that's what I think of, anyways.
Yeah, no, you're completely right.
Yeah,
that's a really great way to think about it. It's not purely just being overweight, and that's why being overweight is not being overweight is not being overweight. Mm-hmm. Right? There's
I'm technically overweight based on whatever that chart is. Like I've been overweight
sure. My life. Yeah, I mean, if you take, there's always these guys in the Marine
charts,
Corps, right? We had this guy. He was short. Mm-hmm. He was a power lifter, I think, prior to joining the Marine Corps, and would do it like kind of semi-casually while he was in. Like every once in a while, he'd go through phases where he would lift really heavy and like go do a competition on the weekend or something like that. It wasn't something he talked about a lot.
Mhm.
But it's like, you just take one look at him. You're like, this dude's like huge.
Yeah.
Right. But he was short. And so
Mhm.
he did not do well on the Marine Corps like body metric assessments.
Yeah.
Where they like measure your neck and, they're basing it all on like ratios with your height. And they keep telling this guy, they're like, you're unhealthy, you're overweight. And he's like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, I'm not fat. Like, it's just muscle. And like nobody knows because they're just, you got these first sergeants just looking at charts being like, well, this is what the Marine Corps standards say. And so like
I think I remember like one of those charts said like my like ideal weight. Like I'm not a big guy, I'm not overly short. I'm like 5'10", right? And it was like you should be like 145 pounds. Well, at one point I was 145 pounds at that. I was like nothing. So it's like, how do these charts work? Like I walk around like 170 now, and like I wouldn't consider myself like massively overweight, but to some chart, I'm sure I am.
Yeah. Interestingly, when I was on the boxing team for Camp Pendleton, they sent us to get this very high level body fat, like metabolic body fat screening. I think it was when I was on the boxing team. It was either the boxing or the MMA team. I don't remember which one it was. It was like during that period of my life where I was basically working as an athlete professionally for about 6 months of my life. So all I did was train all the time. And I'm a naturally very slender person. And then you just take working out professionally on top of it. And it's like, I was in the best shape of my life. And I go and get this, like, it's like, I don't even know exactly. It's not just like your standard, like weigh the person, check the calipers on their love handles, calculate their body fat percentage. It wasn't that simple. It was like that. Plus, like, breathe in this like glucometer so that they could basically test like the metabolic rate of your CO2 consumption, like all this crazy stuff that they measure. And then they put it all into this crazy algorithm to more accurately calculate your body fat percentage. And I calculated at 1.5% body fat.
So how are you even like breathing at that?
And
I thought that was scary to be like under 3%.
Well, the person was like, are you having like any like neurologic problems? I was like, nah, I'm good. Like my wife to this day does not even like cannot wrap her brain around like how that was even possible.
Yeah, I thought it was like dangerous to get under 3%. They can have issues.
I mean, probably for the average person, but I mean, honestly, my baseline is probably close to 3%.
Yeah.
So whatever it is, maybe it's my Middle Eastern European heritage. I'm just, I'm sure at some point, something's gonna flip. It's not like everybody in my family is just a skinny mini, but I'm mid-30s and still kicking. I think doing all right. But we never wrapped up one of the other anecdotes we were going through about what were we talking about?
Well, I think we wanted to get into like endorphins and what they are.
Yeah, we were getting there. Different types of fat.
Oh, different type of fat. Yeah, fat is fat is fat isn't fat.
Fat is not fat is not fat. Yeah. Now it's not that complex, to be honest with you. But in general, right, it does kind of break down to like visceral fat versus just like general musculoskeletal fat. Visceral fat is much more associated with metabolic derangement. Metabolic derangement is basically means like your body is not using the energy sources appropriately. That's the simplest explanation, right? Like you can be fat, and it's basically like it's in the sense that like you have like a very simple situation of like you put too much, let's just say glucose, right? Sugar, whatever, right? That's what your body ultimately just basically runs on like fat and sugar, right?
Right.
Fat, sugar, and protein.
Right, because that is like you outlined it. That's an energy source, right?
Yeah.
You put in what you need to use up theoretically, and then you're good.
So there's the situation where, you keep dumping too much energy source in and you only use so much and you're just like consistently net positive, right? Like if you put in,
then you start storing it,
500 units of energy and you only use 200 units of energy throughout the day, that means you just unloaded an extra 300 units of energy. Well, where are you going to put that fat, protein, and glucose? Well, your body's going to store it somewhere.
So it's got to find places.
Right? So that's the simplest. Like, you put more in than what you use. That's one issue. Then you get the issue of, well, what if you put in 500, but your body's not able to use it? So you're expending energy, but you're not using the energy sources appropriately that you're putting in, right? Like your body's not processing those energy sources.
So what kind of issue is that when somebody's not using that?
So that's where you get into things like type 2 diabetes, right? So diabetes is type 2 diabetes is your primary, what we call metabolic derangement.
And type 2, is type 2 the one that you're born with?
No, that's type 1 diabetes.
Okay.
Type 1, well, and so you're not really born with it. You're kind of born with it, but you get
what I'm saying.
Type 1 it's an autoimmune disorder.
Right. They fall under different categories. Like one, you guys
you
condition your body to it, and then the other one you kind of like have there, but you can manage it.
Yeah. So basically, the other thing too is, right, they very different disease processes. Type 1, these people tend to be very skinny.
Yeah.
Because their bodies don't have the ability to process or basically to absorb any of the glucose that they're putting into their body, right? So they generally have very low blood sugar levels.
And when they're just like expending it, right? Like it's just not even getting absorbed. It's just
exactly right. So type 1 diabetics are usually, initially, right, they're very skinny, they're very lethargic, they lack energy, and their blood sugar is low. Type 2 diabetics are like the opposite.
Right.
In the sense that, like, they have all this energy available. Their blood sugar levels are through the roof, but they can't use any of it because their body has basically we've talked a lot about this idea on this show of receptors or keys and locks for keys, right? The locks basically become immune to the key and they stop opening the gates that allow their body to use the sugar in their blood, right? And so that's why they start, getting all of this sugar just starts building up in their blood, basically.
It's like pooling up and it's spilling over, like in a nutshell.
That's the simplest explanation. So it's like type 2 diabetes is a resistance to
too much sugar,
absorbing blood sugar, like the sugar in the blood. So the sugar just hangs out in the blood, basically.
Gotcha.
Type 1 diabetes, you like can't even.
Got it. It's like they don't even seem like they're really the same thing. Like obviously both revolve around glucose, right?
Yeah, they do, but they revolve around insulin.
Insulin, okay.
Right, so you need insulin in order to utilize for your cells to basically utilize glucose, right? Insulin is kind of like the key that opens the door to let glucose in.
Got it.
And so type 1 diabetics, it's an autoimmune disorder. Insulin is made in the pancreas. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disorder that destroys the cells of the pancreas.
Got it.
That literally your body's immune system goes in and just destroys the pancreas. Well, now the pancreas is destroyed. Your pancreas can't make insulin, so your blood sugar drops because you have no ability to even really absorb glucose.
Interesting.
Type 2 diabetics, they basically have it's more acquired. You're essentially flooding your system with sugar, right? Chugging 2-liter bottles of soda, flood the system with sugar. your body's just pumping out, your pancreas is pumping out insulin. Eventually the keys or the locks that are unlocked by insulin, they're like, we're so sick of seeing this key that keeps unlocking us. Like, we're just going to stop.
Yeah. And then it can't really process all the sugar coming in. Right.
Yeah. So now you're just dumping sugar in their bodies can absorb it from the gut, but they can't really process it.
Like filter it out. So it's still not using it for energy at that point. Right.
Yeah. So that's where we get in. I mean, I don't really want to get, the point is not to really sit here and
sorry, it's just fascinating too.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to, I mean, if that's what we want to talk about, I could have done a little prep to give you some better. I'm giving very vague general.
No, this is a good conversation. It all fits together.
Sure. But in general, right, diabetes is considered like a derangement of the metabolic system, right? Your metabolism is now not working as it's intended, right? In the situation of like you put too much energy in and you don't use it, and so your body stores it and you gain weight, that's not really a metabolic problem. Your metabolism is working fine. You're just putting too much stuff into the system, right? In diet, once you get to a point though where you've developed diabetes, now your metabolism is not working properly. And even if you put and that's why like people with like type 2 diabetes, they like can fix their diets and still have problems with weight control because now their metabolism is just not functioning properly. And that's why honestly the best thing they've shown is that the best way to treat diabetes is to prevent it. And if you can catch pre-diabetes, which is like, because it's a slowly developing process. It's not something you just like don't have one day and then you wake up and it's like, oh, I have diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see the writing on the wall. If you can catch it before it's developed into a permanent metabolic disorder of diabetes, diet and exercise is all you need to do to go from pre-diabetes back to normal. And it's amazing. So if you can catch it at that point, lifestyle modification can save somebody from lifelong need for diabetic medication. And interestingly, I've heard from some people that they say literally they don't even need diet and exercise modification, like full blown. If they have a patient with pre-diabetes that they think is not taking it very seriously, or they're because there's a component as a doctor, right? You have to think about like how receptive is the patient going to be to the treatment that I'm offering them, right?
It's a two-way street.
Yeah. Right. Like I can say, do this, and this, and wake up at 4 a.m. every day and go exercise. But if that's not realistic for that patient, they're not going to do it. You might as well not offer any medical treatment because your treatment is unattainable, right? It'd be like if a patient had cancer and like explosive cancer where their life expectancy is like a week, and you're like, well, let me put you on a chemotherapy regimen that will basically kill you today. I'll give you CPR, bring you back to life, and that will extend your life expectancy from 1 week to a week and a half. Right? Like that makes no sense.
Right.
So the treatment has to match the patient and the goals of the patient, simply. So if a full-blown, obviously the best thing to do for any patient is, let's fix your diet and lifestyle exercise completely, right? That'd be better. That'd be good for anyone, not just a patient with pre-diabetes. But if that's not realistic for the patient, they found that even if that patient drinks soda and you can convince the patient to make one lifestyle change and stop drinking soda, they've seen pre-diabetes basically go away.
That's wild.
Yeah. They're like, you can still eat cheeseburgers, hamburgers, French fries. Don't bother exercising. But if you stop drinking soda, there's a high chance your pre-diabetes will go away.
Well, that's what So I mentioned this is just funny and full circle here is when I was an overweight kid in middle school, and I didn't change my diet much, but what I did was I started running and I stopped drinking soda. And I lost like 50 pounds in like 3 months. It was crazy. It was wild.
Yep. I mean, I used to drink a lot of soda as a kid.
I used to
feel
drink
like when
a
we were
ton.
kids, like
Yeah, it was fine. Have a
we
Pepsi.
were just starting to kind of understand the negative health consequences of soda.
Yeah.
I honestly can't even really describe what it was in my life that made me stop drinking soda, but it was old. I was older, like probably around 17 or 18, like around the time I joined the Marine Corps. I think it was like when I started getting really serious about exercising and working out prior to enlisting. I just realized I was like, if I don't drink soda, I feel better.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. I was like, I'll just stop that. And I was like, I feel a lot better. I was like, I'm just going to keep drinking water. I feel way better.
I mean, that largely persisted throughout most of my life. I mean, I'll drink a soda once a month.
I won't drink one by itself. I couldn't tell you the last time I had
just a soda. I don't just drink a soda, but don't get me wrong. I'm a huge sugar person. I eat sugar all the time.
I don't drink soda. Tooth. I like a snack here and there, but I don't have like a hankering. I would much rather have like a nice burger than I would like a piece of cake.
I'd rather have both, frankly. I'm not a big cake eater, but man, like I can cannonball a carton of ice cream. Like it's dangerous.
Ice cream, not my thing at all.
Oh, see,
anything that sugary, anything like that sugary, I just
carton of ice cream is like a half-gallon carton of ice cream is like 3 servings for me. Like 3 nights, I'll smoke a third of the carton like each night for like 3 nights in a row. Just gone 3 days.
I couldn't tell you the last time I had just ice cream.
Like it's too much of an inconvenience to even put the ice cream in a bowl anymore. I just sit there and eat it out of the carton. So if you come over to my house and I offer you ice cream, well, 1, I probably won't offer it to you. 2, if you want a bowl of ice cream, you're probably eating out of a carton of ice cream that I just eat out of directly. My man Karthik says cookies and cream ice cream all day.
That was my go-to.
I love me some good
cookies and cream is good, but I'm still just like, I'll have a bowl of it. I will be a human being and I'll put it in a bowl. I'm not going to eat it like a savage, just out of the container like some people over here. But
I mean, I'm at 50-50. It depends. But I mean, oh man. And the thing, I mean, I'll get it very specific about my favorite ice creams, but cookies and cream, Snickers bar, and iced coffee. Is that an ice cream flavor, or
or is that just a snack? Because I would eat a Snickers bar and have an iced coffee before I would eat ice cream.
I'm not a big iced coffee drinker.
I love cold brew.
I will have a Dunkin' frozen coffee every once in a while.
I've never even had it. Have you had a cold brew? Cold brew is so much better than just the. Okay, here's another question, and we're getting way off topic now.
Hey, we're talking about health, nutrition, exercise, how it affects our moods. What elevates your mood? What snacks elevate your mood?
Me, I love just like a chip or something. Like chips are good.
What are your favorite types of chips?
And this is people are gonna think I'm just a crazy person. From Aldi, there's these sweet potato chips. Aldi? They are so good.
Sweet potato chips.
They're not overly salty. I love sweet potatoes.
I can see that.
And they're delicious. But I love that, or like a good tortilla chip.
Do you eat plain tortilla chips?
Of course I do. I'm like I eat plain chicken breast. You're talking
about eats plain tortilla chips. I can't wrap my brain. Delicious. Like a tortilla chip is not meant to be eaten plain.
I'm not taking the time.
A tortilla chip has to be paired with something.
I'm not taking the time. I'm shoveling them into my gullet.
Well, that's why I don't eat tortilla chips plain. My favorite chips are salt and vinegar potato chips. Good. I do love salt and vinegar potato chips. I've been loving recently kettle corn. I can just destroy bags of kettle
corn is so good. Yeah, I'm with you.
There's this Wegmans kettle corn made with coconut oil that literally
we don't have a Wegmans here, but there's like
there's a brand that
does it. There's a brand that does it that has one that tastes it's got a kettle corn flavor. It's like supposed to be healthier for you. Fantastic.
Trader Joe's kettle corn's pretty good.
I like Trader Joe's too.
Trader Joe's kettle corn.
Their movie theater popcorn is good too.
I've never had their movie theater.
It's like in a red bag. Try it next time you go.
Interesting. All right, we'll try that. Hopefully Julia's in the chat. Put it on the shopping list next time you go to Trader Joe's.
What I was getting at, do you drink your coffee black or do you put something in it?
I started out, when I was younger, I would drink. I've had a coffee evolution. It was first it was milk and sugar and caramel sauce because I would it was like before I liked coffee.
Before you like the taste of coffee, yeah.
And then at some point in my life, it didn't take long. I'm like, man, it's too sweet. Let me take the caramel out. Let me just have milk and sugar. And even then, I was like, I feel like the sugar makes my teeth feel gross.
Yep. You feel sticky. I don't like feeling sticky.
And then I just started drinking coffee with just milk. And then I went to black, realized that is honestly, I felt like it was just burning a hole through my stomach.
I love that feeling.
So I started putting milk back in my coffee, and I've been a coffee with just a little bit of milk pretty much my whole life now.
See, that's where I started putting some milk in it mainly to cool it off. But man, I just love black coffee. And it does. It feels like it's eating directly through your soul. And I love that burn when I drink.
It feels like it's burning a hole through my stomach. It's so acidic. That's why I put the milk in, I think, more for the pH balance than anything else.
Just straight black coffee. This is the best thing in the world.
I don't know. I like a little bit of milk flavor in my coffee, but I don't like cream. Like if somebody if I go to a coffee shop and they put cream in my coffee when I ask for milk, I'll be like, no, you got to give me another. I can't just drink it. It's so gross. Just heavy cream straight in my coffee. No, thank you.
Oof.
But so the one point we didn't make, going back to how we got down this path of snacks and metabolic derangements. The actual, you ever notice there's some people that are clearly larger, overweight, whatever the politically correct term is these days. Karthik knows I'm not very much for political correctness, but I've gotten better in my older age. I like to be a little kinder and a little softer on the edges these days. There's people where I would say they look more uniform. They kind of look more uniform and then they're just bigger. And then you get those people with those really characteristic pear shapes.
Yeah.
Where they have
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Their waist and their hips are just so disproportionately large.
Yeah.
So that is actually, that's a real thing. That is a type of obesity or, being overweight that is more associated with visceral fat.
Okay. And is that a genetic thing? Is it a lifestyle thing?
Question.
Both?
I don't know. Maybe Karthik, if he's still floating around in the chat, might know. He's got more of a medicine training background than I do, actual true medicine. I'm just a meathead.
Because there are people that have thyroid issues, right? Is that the one?
Well, yeah, if you have a thyroid issue,
subcutaneous fat.
So
I've heard that before.
Well, subcutaneous, musculoskeletal fat is kind of what but visceral fat. So Karthik, visceral fat are people who develop that real pear-shaped waistband distribution of fat that's associated with visceral fat. Is that typically more genetic?
So he thinks a lot of it is genetic.
Yeah.
Okay. And
that would make sense.
It looks like it's genetic. I know it just doesn't look natural. It looks like something had to have occurred genetically for that to even happen. And I'm sure there's ways to combat it,
but that's the kind of, that's the type of obesity where, you really, you can literally, you look at someone and you're like, I'm genuinely concerned for your health.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not because you're overweight and,
no, it's you don't want something.
I'm looking at you with X-ray vision. And I'm like, your organs probably look terrible.
Yeah. Interesting stuff, man.
Yeah. So those are the facts from the inside. Yeah.
What else we got? We didn't even get into how it affects the brain.
Current events. As far as I know, Having higher visceral proportion of fat tends to be worse health-wise. Yeah, that's what we were getting at. We were just trying to figure out if basically the visceral fat, what's the word I'm looking for? Propensity for visceral fat development, if that's genetic.
Or if it could happen from just strictly lifestyle.
Yeah. Although I would imagine it's probably...
It's got to be a little bit.
I mean, it's got to be tied to probably, diabetes, metabolic derangements, genetic. I'm sure there's a genetic predisposition.
Yeah.
I mean, does that mean that somebody can develop these things? Yes.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I think at that point you have to kind of, you do have to think about it from a little bit of a, what came first, the chicken or the egg type of scenario, right? And someone who's got a lot of subcutaneous fat, right? The thing that came first was probably the obesity, being overweight. For the person that has more of a visceral fat burden, the thing that came first was probably their metabolic derangement.
Got it.
They could probably both stem from lifestyle choices, right? You can develop type 2 diabetes and metabolic derangements from your lifestyle choices and, lack of exercise, poor diet, et cetera, et cetera. But the sequence of events is probably poor diet, lack of exercise, transitions to diabetes, metabolic derangement, and then that diabetes and metabolic derangement subsequently turns into this, massive development of visceral fat and obesity. Whereas when you're more on the subcutaneous track, and I'm kind of hypothesizing here, it's probably more of a direct relationship as opposed to this sort of like indirect relationship with metabolic derangement in the middle for subcutaneous fat, for visceral fat, where subcutaneous fat is probably simply poor lifestyle and diet, poor lifestyle choices in diet, excess caloric intake, excess subcutaneous fat. Let's see. Karthik might be one of the smartest people I've ever met. So let's see what he has to say. It's interesting because across the board, ethnic groups with higher visceral fat tend to develop type 2 diabetes at lower BMIs than other groups. So that would kind of fall in line with exactly what I was just laying out, right? Mm-hmm. If you are the type of person that has developed this high visceral fat body type, right? Your development of type 2 diabetes is preceding that development of
even with the lower body mass index.
Yeah, because overall, type 2 diabetes is developing first.
Right.
So it's diet, poor lifestyle. When I say poor lifestyle, I'm generally referring to lack of exercise, sedentariness, et cetera, et cetera. Genetic predisposition leads to type 2 diabetes, leads to obesity, right? But you're going to have that period of time where the patient is showing with type 2 diabetes and a lower BMI. Whereas the person that's in a purely excessive caloric intake category, it's probably going to be poor lifestyle choices, poor diet, excessive caloric intake, obesity, and then eventually, it's all going to come together anyway, right? You stay obese long enough, eventually, it's very well going to, progress into type 2 diabetes, right? So in many ways, you're on the same merry-go-round.
Yeah. But it's interesting to just understand which one kind of, you can tell like something, how it plays into it, which is fascinating. This stuff's fascinating too.
Yeah, you're basically, I think you're looking at two different mechanisms that ultimately lead to very similar outcomes.
Yeah.
However, because one mechanism is probably more deadly than another and harder to reverse. I think that's another thing we haven't really talked about, reversibility.
Right.
One mechanism is much more reversible than another.
I feel like that's what I was trying to get at, is like one you could catch and start to revert. One, it's going to be a lot harder to do that just based on your genetic makeup.
Yeah. I think excessive caloric intake subcutaneous musculoskeletal fat. Overall, easier to reverse. The other pathway we discussed involving metabolic derangement, type 2 diabetes, I think overall, if you catch it in the pre-diabetic phase, very easy to reverse. Mm-hmm. Once it's developed into full-blown metabolic, a full-blown metabolic disorder, I don't know how like truly reversible that kind of stuff is. Now you're getting, I mean, you can get into like gastric bypass and all this, surgical interventions, which, totally outside the scope of this conversation in terms of reversibility. I mean, from what I understand, there's some really interesting stuff with like true Roux-en-Y bypasses, actually removing significant, I mean, maybe gastric sleeves too. I don't know. I don't have much of I have a very limited,
you haven't done many of those surgeries.
But when you're actually like, I mean, bottom line is in both surgeries, you're physically removing a part of the stomach. Mm-hmm. That's not insignificant. Or that I should say, that's not just significant from a stomach capacity perspective, right? I mean, that was sort of the idea with like like lap bands and all that gastric banding that is largely fallen out of favor. I don't know too many people. I don't think people really still do it. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but the idea there was like, oh, if we just band off the stomach,
you'll feel full, they'll stop eating, right?
Yeah, like it's not that simple. But in these procedures where they're actually literally, Roux-en-Y bypass, gastric sleeves, they're cutting out parts of the stomach and basically, I mean, gastric sleeve, they're not really rewiring anything. They're really just removing part of the stomach. And Roux-en-Y bypass, they're removing part of the stomach and rerouting everything. You are removing hormonal cells from the body. Hormone secreting cells. There's a lot of hormone secreting cells in the stomach.
Interesting.
And so they found that, when you remove probably large populations of these hormone secreting cells, they've seen literally type 2 diabetes go away, which really is, I mean, largely considered, I think, still an uncurable disease, right? It's a manageable disease, but it's not, you don't have a magic pill that fixes type 2 diabetes.
Right.
But in some cases, right, actual bariatric surgery, removing parts of the stomach and these large hormonal cell populations that are, part of the stomach has had patients basically resolve their type 2 diabetes.
I didn't even know that was the thing.
It is a thing. I don't know how reliable it is. Right?
No, I mean, I guess you probably wouldn't want to just like hope that it cures diabetes. Yeah. Like the fact that it's even a possibility is
I mean, this is where you'd have to ask an actual bariatric surgeon, right? Mm-hmm. They do tons of these things. When the 4 weeks I did bariatric surgery, because they're doing a small number of procedures, like a small variety of procedures, right? A true bariatric surgeon, I don't know how many surgeries are they doing? 2, 3, 4 different types of surgeries max. Mm-hmm. Compare that to a neurosurgeon you couldn't count like the number of different procedures a neurosurgeon will do, right? You can't just put craniotomy in a procedure and say they're all the same. No, like there's 15 different craniotomies probably, right? 15 different spine surgeries. These are all different procedures, right? Whereas a bariatric surgeon, they're going to do the same probably 3 or 4 surgeries, but they're going to do them at high volumes, just over and over, churn them out. And there's pros and cons to both, right? This is the type of procedure where, you probably do want someone who's more focused on doing the same procedure and finding a way to do it perfectly rather than someone who's got a wide breadth of experience and, dynamic and can adapt and adjust. And, in a neurosurgeon, you probably want somebody who's seen a big spectrum and, because there's a lot of unknown when you go into someone's head, right? And you want someone with experience that can, they could say, oh, I've seen this before, right? I'm not going to get tripped up on this
Right.
When you're talking about bariatric surgery, there shouldn't be a whole lot of unknown when you go.
Stomach's a stomach, right? Yeah, you don't want to find
mean,
like a catfish in there or something.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, you shouldn't find, I mean, yeah, you might find some scarring or some bands or adhesions, whatever, right?
But it should
by
still
and
be
large,
a
you should
stomach.
not encounter, you shouldn't like open up someone's belly and be like, oh, there's a tumor here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a little unexpected. Frankly, you know, it's not uncommon to do a brain surgery where you're like, yeah, there's something there on the scan, but we have no idea what it is. And you're like, maybe it's a tumor, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Or
I was listening to one of my football podcasts, and the guy, Will Compton, is Busting with the Boys. He was talking about how he did like an off-season scan or something, and they saw a mass on his cerebellum. Right, somewhere at like the base. They saw a mass there, and he went and got it checked out. He was like starting to freak out, didn't know what it was, thought it might be cancer. And like he's like, but I have to get a neurosurgeon involved. They call up the neurosurgeon. The neurosurgeon calls him back. He's like, you're good. I think this is something you're actually born with, because this mass has been on all of your scans, but because it's been on all of them, no one's ever even noticed it. And it's
like
changed minimally.
It was like an arachnoid cyst or something.
Yeah, he didn't know, but that's what they saw. They said it was probably a cyst.
That's actually not an uncommon conversation.
Yep.
I mean, there's this whole idea. I mean, generally speaking, like, I don't know, it's not a term I love, but the reality is I think it does capture reality, right? This idea of neurophobia. Like, if you're not a neurologist or a neurosurgeon, and neurologists and neurosurgeons, I've found, they deal with very, very different things. They've got a lot of overlap in the stroke world, but I think outside of that, they largely deal with very, very different things. I mean, they have very different perspectives, right? Neurologists and neurosurgeons work together, but they look at things in very different ways. But outside of those two specialties, as soon as the brain gets mentioned, people are like, I don't know, call neurosurgeons.
Yeah.
They don't like it, in the sense that, and I don't want to say like, yucky brains, I don't like it. It's like,
they don't even know what they're looking at, or no, I don't want to say they don't know what they're looking
at. That's not bad. Honestly, you can probably give them more credit than they probably give themselves. I think the issue is that the stakes are so high, right? It's very, like, medicine's very litigious, right? You mess up someone's brain, the family's going to sue you, right? Neurosurgeons, kind of neurologists, it's just the world you live and you work in. So it comes with the territory.
Right.
But if you don't live and work in that world, the threat of like, oh my gosh, like if I trash this person's brain, I'm trashing this entire human being. I don't want to make a mistake. I'm going to call the people who do brains every single day rather than trust my training. And that's, I think, a lot of people's perspective.
And what you were just talking about, like, think of the different things you've seen. Not every single thing you do is like another one, because they're so vastly different. So when something could be, open to interpretation, for lack of a better term, you want somebody who looks at this stuff every single day and knows what they're looking at, what it could potentially mean, and has seen things just like this, right? Because
the problem is when that trickles down to every facet of medicine, now it's like, well, what are you going to do? You get a patient that comes in who doesn't have an isolated, solid organ issue, and you need a different specialist for every organ of the body, basically. It's like, it can get out of hand. And sometimes these patients, they do, right? You'll have a specialist from every single service consulting on this patient. And it can create a lot of mayhem where if you're like, man, if there was more confidence from the general team on a lot of this stuff, you could avoid a lot of, extra hands in the pot.
Which that can be messy too. I see where you're coming from.
I can see it from both sides. I don't think there's a solution other than, I don't think there's a right or a wrong way.
I need a right.
Yeah. Right. And, that's why, like, I mean, this is getting into more of the practical nitty gritty, but like, as being on call, I'd have vastly different call nights depending on who the trauma attending is. All right. Some trauma attendings, anything brain, call neurosurgery. They know looking at the scan, there's nothing to do. They don't want to be legally liable, right? So they just call neurosurgery, right? It's not that they're incompetent. It's not that they're incapable. It's that they don't want to be liable. Then any other night, maybe you're on call with this person or that person. There was a couple of them where, and I guess they're kind of cowboys in the sense of like, they knew what they were talking about. They're not worried about getting sued, and they would just handle it, and those were generally, what you don't want is somebody to totally not call you about something that they really needed to call you about. That's like worst case scenario.
Man,
but
that just reminded me of something.
When you get those nights where you have somebody who's, really okay with not calling you over every single little tiny traumatic sub-Iraq, and they're like, oh, like there was one attending who was very like protocol, like this person knew every letter of every protocol, and they would like measure the little sub-Iraq hemorrhage. It was like, if it was like anything less than like exactly, I don't know, whatever, 1.5 centimeters of subarachnoid hemorrhage or whatever the protocol says, like they would not call. And it was great because then you don't get these calls over like little tiny traumas where it's like, nothing to do.
Measure it.
Right. And they're like, well, that's why there's protocols in place. Right. I mean, admittedly, there's probably some other explanations for their rigidness, but I'm like, hey, the protocol is in place. You're just following it. I'm all good. Right. Anyway, go on. Tell me your.
Well, it's just, there was this documentary we started watching about this guy who, I think he was like a spine surgeon, and he talked a big game. And then when it came to practice, like he was a butcher, and it was like a major problem.
Are you talking about the Dr. Death?
Yeah.
Oh, I
started watching.
I have to really, I know of Dr. Death. I've never actually sat down and like listened to podcasts, or is there a Netflix special?
It's either Netflix or Peacock.
He's very his whole story is very popular. I do have to kind of.
Yeah, it's something I started watching. I thought of you immediately because I was like, this is wild. And obviously you're in that world. But to just see this guy's like reckless abandon for reality when it came to operating on people was wild.
I mean, that's definitely an extreme.
It seemed like, and everybody knew, and everybody said like, it seemed like it could have been like, I think the bigger issue is that it could have and should have been stopped by the hospital or the program, and it just wasn't. Like that was the bigger issue. I think that's why it became a story.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? People are terrified of ever letting anything like that happen again. And so then things really spiral into the other, kind of spin out into the complete opposite direction. But
it's worth checking out. But something you said when you started talking about like, you said something about spines and procedures, and I just started thinking about this guy. I watched it very recently.
Very popular. Yeah. But anyway, let's bring it back to exercising the brain.
Yep.
And wind down. I mean, we've had a good conversation tonight. I've enjoyed the show.
Yeah, we've covered a lot.
We've covered a lot, some on topic, some off topic. Yeah. But I think let's send everybody away with a little bit of a factoid, if you will. Because one of the questions that I had for myself, even though, like I said, some shows I spend tons of time reading, some shows I don't. Different phases of life. Right now, I'm in a phase of life where taking advantage of a slower pace, I would say, spending a lot of time outdoors, and generally less time indoors staring at a computer screen. And it's been good both for my mental health and my physical health. But one of the questions that I had ahead of today's stream, kind of more of an intellectual thing I wanted to learn, because I also use our streams and our topics as an opportunity to kind of prompt myself to learn something that I don't know a lot about, rather than just come up here and, tout my scholarliness about things I know things about, which frankly is not that many things. Given this way my life's been going, I could probably talk a lot more about biblical theology these days than medicine, but I've been enjoying that's totally unrelated to this stream, but that's what I've been enjoying a lot of my free time, is listening to other PhD researchers and their discussions on biblical theology. It's actually fascinating how much these people don't agree, but to hear it from various perspectives is, I don't know, it's been fun. I listen to these, lectures like hours and hours while I'm outside working. But anyway, back to the original point. What did I want to learn in relation to tonight's topic? And I thought to myself, the question I had was, what are endorphins? Right? That's I feel like a phrase we throw around all the time. Oh, the endorphins are released and I'm feeling good, I'm feeling that high. I don't know. I mean, what does an endorphin mean in your mind?
Same thing as dopamine. It's all the same stuff, right? It's a good feeling. Endorphins are flowing.
Oh, we got an error, my friend.
Oh, geez.
Our lawnmower is stuck somewhere.
Oh, no. It escaped. The lawnmower escaped. Let's
look at the map and see where it is. Oh, it's in the back of my yard. See that little dot right here? Over here?
Nope, that's just where it stopped tracking it. It's down the street.
No, it looks like it's stuck in the back of the yard.
It's eating the neighbors.
I'll have to go out and fix my lawnmower. So another reason to wind this stream down. But the question I like is general, really, we use this phrase all the time. Oh, the endorphin release and yada yada yada.
Endorphins, I always associated with adrenaline, though. It's like that. When adrenaline picks up, you're releasing endorphins, and that's why people get these bouts of super strength. They're being able to ignore pain, right? That's what I think of when I think of endorphins. Endorphin rush. He lifted up a car. He broke every bone in his body, but he didn't feel it, and saved the children from the burning vehicle.
Save the children from the burning vehicle. Well, let's wrap in with this article that I thought put things really nicely. I thought they were well referenced, right? We'll come down here. Let's validate the legitimacy of the article. They're referencing over 35 articles from peer-reviewed sources. This is not just a blog article. So I think a relatively reliable summary. So their first question, what are endorphins? So they're proteins that act as neurotransmitters. Okay. Well, that's interesting. However, they are also proteins that are released into your vascular system from outside the brain, but they are not blood-brain barrier permeable proteins. So the idea is okay, is this really, we talked about the runner's high. Is this the type of, when you're getting that runner's high, is it a release of, when you finish your run, you're like, is it a release of endorphins? Well, it sounds like actually the answer from what we understand is really no. It's probably more endocannabinoid system, while not necessarily fully responsible for that runner's high, right? That is at least a component. And we've talked about the endocannabinoid system on this show in the past, so I won't really ramble on about that, but I'm sure there'll be more than enough reason. But yeah, like you said, endorphins, they're these peptides, these tiny little proteins. And what they do is they actually act as a blocking neurotransmitter. So typically the neurotransmitters, they're neurosignaling that would signal pain, right? What they do is they basically, it's almost like a imagine taking a key to put in a lock, right? We talk about this lock key metaphor all the time. Except this key, the little tab at the end is broken off. So it just, it fits in the lock, but you can't turn it to unlock the lock, right? It blocks any other key from trying to actually fit into that lock. So that's what it's doing. It's basically blocking the engagement of pain signals. But interestingly, it also has involvement in the immune and the inflammatory response, right? So release of endorphins helps tamponade or tamp down an inflammatory response. Overall reduces the stress that is felt. So basically, I believe cortisol helps to decrease cortisol release. I suspect they're just saying general the stress response. But so I would anticipate that it's reducing cortisol response. But this may be, more or less where you're getting the neurologic effect, right? So it's triggering a release of dopamine. And this is where kind of going back to our previous discussions where we've talked about how dopamine pairs activities, right? So if endorphins are being released during exercise, that's helping to stimulate dopamine release. Dopamine is helping to pair exercise with positive feelings, right? And so if you get this sort of like flood of accomplishment, flood of relief that comes when you finish running, and dopamine is just surging through your system, right? That's going to pair that activity of running and completing a run with a reward, right? So it's naturally a very rewarding feeling. But that's not being fueled by endorphins directly. It's being fueled by the dopamine that is
pairing it with
released by endorphin
activity. And wonder if that plays into that daredevil aspect that we talked about before. They get maybe it's endorphins actually doing it, and then they're getting the dopamine from that.
I think that is a very plausible suggestion.
We're connecting the dots.
Yeah. And we'll continue to connect them each and every week as we learn more on the Rad and Norty show. We're winding down. I think we're both getting a little tired here. We've gone for a while, almost 2 hours tonight.
That's what happens
when I guess we're making up for a missed week, apparently. Yeah.
And it was a good conversation.
It
took a turn I wasn't expecting.
I really thank you, everyone, for joining us in the chat this week. We hope you'll come back next week, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Same time, same place. Let's see what the topic is. Let me pull up our schedule real quick. Upcoming, nurturing brain development. Very vague topic. I don't think we've laid out too many ideas for this one. Nurturing brain development. So I guess what we'll be talking about are sort of, transitioning from the idea of exercise and how it positively impacts your brain. What types of lifestyle, activities, hobbies, learning enhances brain development and learning, and overall, I think, keeping our brains moving forward and not going stagnant in life. I think that's what so many people are, really striving for, is like, how do you keep your brain engaged? Right. And I mean, because frankly, we live in a very lazy world. I don't know how,
especially with the internet. I mean,
yeah,
AI, we're very fortunate to have everything at our fingertips, but I do think
but the question, I would bet the counter question, are we fortunate?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Degrading us as a society.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Very, I don't know what I'm looking for here, but yeah, we're very conditioned to not have to work very hard to find things.
Yeah,
and I do think that hurts.
Brain you don't have to go to the library to do research.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to even get up, change out of your pajamas to go to work.
Nope.
It's the number of people that are getting up, putting their work boots on, and going outside is decreasing by the minute.
Yeah.
And admittedly, I think that's why you see so much striving for mental stimulation and engagement in other areas of life. And so I guess that's kind of a little bit of a primer of the direction we're going to head in next week, is really how do we stimulate brain development, brain growth, and not fall stagnant in this world. And I think there's a lot of interesting things to talk about too, kind of getting down more at the more, I guess, pediatric kid level, right?
Yeah, because I think it falls under like a few different categories, right? It's like development in terms of when your brain's actually growing and developing, but then how do you keep it going when you're beyond that stage?
Yeah. So even just as a father raising a young child, soon to be kids in August, we're expecting number 2.
It's getting close.
And it's crazy seeing how they learn, and it's just wild. We're at this phase where it's like every day is something new. It's not like 6-7 months ago where over the course of like 2-3 weeks you watch a baby learn to like roll over and start to crawl, and it takes them like weeks to learn this simple motor skill. It's like every day is something new now. It's like it's wild to watch. So on that note, join us next week, 7 p.m. Eastern, every Wednesday. The Rad and Norty Show will be back talking about nurturing brain development. We hope you'll join us and have a good time. On that, don't forget, everything we do is all part of a nonprofit organization, Brain and Spine Group, which I guess we haven't done a really good job of plugging tonight. That's sort of why we're here doing what we do. Where's our little...
I see the little scan the QR code. We didn't even have the banner, yeah.
Yeah, here we go.
There it is.
Subscribe to us on YouTube. Don't miss us when we go live. Scan the QR code. Support our fundraisers to improve brain and spine health around the world. Obviously, Rad, myself, and Norty, what we do is support the veteran programs of Brain and Spine Group, which is a nonprofit organization. So all your financial donations are tax exempt to the full extent of the law and goes towards a great charity. So with that, if you consider ever supporting what Brain and Spine Group is doing, we would greatly appreciate it. You can also join our YouTube community. All the proceeds from that go to supporting the nonprofit organization as well. And Norty and I will be back next week doing what we do, continuing to push our mission forward. So we hope to see you there, and have a great rest of your week. We're looking forward to the next one. On that note, Rad and Norty,